Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Sagas of Swamp Thing. Today we are reading issue number 20, and just a little catch up on what happened in the last issue. We found out that there is a second Swamp Thing that has been walking around the Louisiana swamps, and it is more of like a mindless monster than our Swamp Thing is. And this duplicate actually came from Swamp Thing himself, because in issue 5 of Swamp Thing, he gets his arm cut off when he's helping out the Raven Winds, and that arm ends up growing itself a Swamp Thing body. And then on instinct or muscle memory, this duplicate Swamp Thing just walked down to Louisiana, and it just happened to run into a Native American man named Hota. And at first Hota was scared, but then he realized that this doppelganger Swamp Thing is not really a threat or anything. It was just kind of walking around mindlessly. So he decided to keep it in his farmhouse. And then at the same time, in a nearby town, we had Matt Cable, Abby, and Bolt, and they were once again looking for Swamp Thing because they always are. And they ran into some locals who said maybe they knew about Swamp Thing, specifically a young boy named Junior. So Matt and Bolt follow Junior to where he said he saw Swamp Thing, and all they find is Hota. And Hota covered and said he did not know what they were talking about. So Matt and Bolt left, but Junior stayed, and then Hota showed him that, in fact, he did know that duplicate Swamp Thing was there, and that he was hiding him in the barn. Now, in the meantime, the real Swamp Thing has been in the area, and he's been pretty depressed. In the last issue, he looked like he was about to commit suicide, but before he could do that and jump off of a cliff, his body, for some reason, we're not sure exactly why, started walking on its own and began being pulled across the swamp. So he's just kind of shuffling around and not really able to control himself. And we left the last issue with Hota taking Junior, the little boy, and the duplicate Swamp Thing to a special area in the swamp that he called the Grotto of Eternal Life. And he revealed to Junior that the reason why his stories feel so real, like he was actually there, is because he was, in fact, and that he is very, very old, and that the waters of this grotto are keeping him alive. And that is where we left off on the last issue. So first things first, with issue 20, we got the cover. We see two Swamp Things fighting in front of a full moon, of course, and the doppelganger looks to be winning. We see him with his yellow eyes, and he is on top of our Swamp Thing, pushing him backwards into the water, and he looks very angry. And the real Swamp Thing is fighting for his life, struggling to not be overcome by the duplicate. And as we turn to the first page, we start off exactly where we left off in the last issue, with Hota showing Junior and duplicate Swamp Thing the Grotto of Eternal Youth. And over this splash page, we get the narration that says, "Here in the swamp, there's a moody calm, a stillness unbroken by the sounds of mankind, the roar of traffic which disturbs the city dweller, the mumbling voices of television which ruin the rural sleeper's night. These things are far away, and well, they should be. Here in the swamp, here in," and then Hota says, "the Grotto of Eternal Youth, a sight seen by no white man before you, Junior Sloan. Not even our giant friend, the fugitive Swamp Thing." And as Junior stares at the waters, the narration says, "Junior Sloan listens, and quite naturally, is awed." And we see on this page that the name of this issue is The Mere Monster, and it is written by Jerry Conway with art by Nestor Redondo. So as we turn the page, we see Hota continuing to tell his story to Junior, and he says, "For centuries, this place has been hidden from the eyes of men, concealed within this swamp. Hidden till I found it when I was a boy, over 180 years ago." And Junior's shocked by this, and he says, But that means you're old. I mean real old." And Hota replies, "Older than any living man, my young friend. You might even say, I am immortal. The world was a different place when I discovered the Grotto, Junior. A better place. I was young, innocent." Then as he's talking, we get some flashbacks to a young Hota drinking from the waters of the Grotto of Eternal Youth. Then we see him getting sick as he walks home, and then we see him getting taken care of by his parents because he's so sick he can't really move. And over these panels, Hota's narration says, "We were all young and innocent in a way. The white man did not covet our land, as he covets the land to the north. And unlike our northern brothers, the people of my tribe were safe from attack, safe from the white man's betrayals, safe for a time. I remember clearly the day I drank the Grotto's water and returned to my parents' tent, deathly ill. It was the same day we first encountered the white men. Then we get a panel of some frontiersmen riding into the village, and they are shooting people and lighting huts on fire, and Hota's narration continues. There were rifle shots from outside the tent, like thunder touching the earth. My father had heard such sounds before, when he traveled north to trade with the settlers. Without thinking, he and my mother burst from the tent into the midst of chaos. 10 white traders, drunk on whiskey, were charging through the village on horseback, firing their muskets and handguns, killing men, women, and children alike, including my mother and father. Then we cut back to present as Hota finishes his story. Somehow I escaped being killed that day, the only one of my tribe who survived the massacre. Perhaps the Great Spirit wished me to survive, so that I could keep the memory of my people alive these 200 years, which I have done by drinking regularly from that pool. After that first time, I became immune to sickness, and have remained immune these many decades. Then we see the duplicate Swamp Thing reach out and touch Hota on the chest, like Hota's story has meant something to him, and Hota says, Well, my story seems to have touched our friend here. And then Junior says, He isn't the only one, sir. I'm sorry about what those men did. I really am. It's like what the people searching for that monster want to do, isn't it? And Hota answers, I expect it is, Junior, which is why I brought you here and showed you the Grotto, so you would understand why I hate men who act without thinking, such as the men who search for this helpless Swamp Thing. Then we cut to the real Swamp Thing, who, just like in the last issue, is being pulled towards something, and he's not sure why, but he's just kind of letting his body do its thing. And over this panel, the narration says, The man mockery we know, slogging through muddy waters, several miles east of the Eternal Grotto. And as Swamp Thing's body continues to move forward on its own, Swamp Thing thinks, Still feel that impulse pulling at me, like invisible fingers. Odd how the pulling's been getting stronger since I woke this morning, as though the nearer I get to whatever's calling me, the more influence it has on my mind. Then we see him walk from the water onto a grassy bank and onto a dirt road, and on that road we can see something rumbling up in the distance, and Swamp Thing thinks, This time, I'm going to let the impulse lead me to whoever is meddling with my mind. Huh? Motorcycles? Then we see the biker gang from last issue who was inside the diner is riding down the road and towards Swamp Thing, and the narration says, Earl Hobart is not a very intelligent man, and like many stupid men, his imagination is somewhat limited. For the past 20 years, he'd led a life of unreality, pretending that the world stopped in 1956 when he bought his first bike. This morning, he's about to discover the world hasn't stopped, though as far as Earl is concerned, it might as well have. So as Swamp Thing walks out onto the road, Earl and his biker gang almost run into him and they have to swerve. And Earl yells out, Mother mercy! Some kind of monster! And I guess because they're on a dirt road, the bikers can't stop in time, and they all have to bail on their bikes. And Swamp Thing just kind of stands there, and the narration says, For the muck-encrusted Swamp Thing, the scene is one he knows all too well. It's the archetypical moment when hysteria and fear unite to become violence and death. But instead of terror, the monstrous creature who was once Dr. Alec Holland feels only regret. Then Earl sits up and he points at Swamp Thing and says, Get him! Get that thing! Before he gets us! And with that, the bikers stand up, and some of them pull out switchblades, and others pull out tools from their tool bags, like wrenches or chains, and they begin to attack Swamp Thing, and the narration says, Without thought, without reason, the bikers obey their leader, and like a motley army, they attack. Chains cutting the air, knives slashing deep into mossy hide. And as Swamp Thing tries to fend off the attacks, he thinks, I don't want this fight. It's wrong. Insane. I have to follow the impulse I keep feeling, but these fools are in my way. Must move quickly, Stop this fast! And then one of the men with a knife jumps on Swamp Thing's back and begins stabbing him repeatedly, and Swamp Thing looks over his shoulder and thinks, ugh, one of them on my back, cutting my arm. Just because my body can't feel pain doesn't mean I'll let this creep use me for a pincushion. And then he reaches behind him and grabs the man by the hair and then pulls the man forward over Swamp Thing's head and onto the ground. And as Swamp Thing does this, the man yells, Earl, he's got me! He's got me! Ah! Then Swamp Thing grabs the knife that is still embedded in his shoulder, and he thinks, it still shocks me to realize how hard it is for this changed body of mine to be hurt. Like a plant, I regrow whatever's cut off me, like the time I lost my arm. My body regenerates lost tissue, and anything I lose, I get back, which makes me almost indestructible. And then he drops the knife on the ground and looks at the remaining bikers, and he thinks, get the point, fellas? And as the men run away, they say, that thing ain't only ugly, it's inhuman. Come on, let's split. If Earl wants to fight that hunk of slime, he can fight it himself. Then they pick their bikes up and they start them and drive away, and Swamp Thing watches them leave, and the narration says, like any sensible leader, Earl Hobart knows full well that in the event of overwhelming odds, discretion is always the better part of valor. Besides, though he'd never admit it, Earl is as petrified as his fellows. And with that, Swamp Thing's body again begins to walk on its own, and Swamp Thing thinks, that impulse, as strong as ever. Have to keep following it. Have to. And as we turn to the next page, we see Matt Cable and Bolt talking to the construction superintendent, Mr. Frank Houston. And they are outside on site where the construction was going on in the last issue. And as they watch the construction, Matt says, I wish I could explain further, Houston, but for now, my lips are sealed. And Mr. Houston replies, let me get this straight. You're a government agent, but you're not working on the case. Not officially. And this thing which attacked our project yesterday is something you've been searching for, but you won't tell me what it is, or where it comes from, or why you want to capture it alive. And Matt replies, that's it in a nutshell, Houston. The Swamp Thing isn't really a menace, despite what happened here yesterday. Then we see Bolt thinking, yeah, Matt, and we both know why. The government is building a secret defense installation here, and we've promised to protect them if the Swamp Thing attacks again. But you and I know the truth about Swamp Thing. He's really a man whose body has been transformed by a super soldier formula into a mucky monstrosity. A man who's so bitter, he wants to curl up and die. Sometimes I wonder why I don't let him. After all, what's the poor jerk got to live for? Maybe that's why he went a little crackers yesterday. And just in case you don't remember, it was actually the duplicate Swamp Thing that attacked the construction site yesterday. And Bolt continues thinking, his wife was killed by the same dudes that caused the explosion that almost killed him. Man, I can sympathize with his feeling, because my lady died almost the same way. Maybe we should let Doc Holland die, Cable, if that's what the man wants. Shouldn't he be allowed to have it and rest in peace? But Bolt's thoughts are cut off as one of the workers from below begins calling up to them, and they're saying, Mr. Houston! Hey! Mr. Houston! And Mr. Houston looks down and says, huh? What's wrong, Carmody? And the worker points to a big rock and says, it's this boulder, Mr. Houston. It's too big for the dozer to shove aside, and we've got to clear this area for the foundation. I was wondering, do you think we should use explosives? And Mr. Houston calls down, do what you have to, Carmody. I don't care if you blow that rock clear off the cliff. And then Matt asks, Houston, do you think that's wise? And then Houston lights a cigar and he casually says, all that's down there is swamp, fella. You do your job, and I'll do mine. Clear? And Bolt answers, very. Then in the next panel, we see a giant explosion of rock, and we get some narration that says, and so, 3 minutes later, an explosion echoes through the morning calm, destroying the silence for miles around. Then we turn the page and we get a very interesting set of panels. There are 3 rows. Each one is showing the moment before the explosion and the moment after, but in different areas. So the first one, we see the duplicate Swamp Thing, Hota and Junior, and they're still at the Grotto of Youth, and Hota is saying, When I found our friend Junior Sloan, he was lost, bewildered, like a child. I saved his life, and he trusts me, just as you trust me, young chief, and I trust you. It is—" But he's cut off as a giant explosion happens above them, and he exclaims, "Spirit of my father!" And Junior points up above them and says, "The cliff! It's exploding!" Then in the second row of panels, we see Earl and his biker gang pulling up to Sloan's diner, and Sloan is coming out with Abby behind him, and Sloan says, "Earl, what's all this racket?" And Earl replies, "There's a monster, Sloan, a slimy thing out on the northeast road." Then Abby thinks, "It's Alec. It must be. I've got to tell Cable." But her thoughts are cut off by the same explosion, and she thinks, "What? The cliff? Some sort of explosion." And I guess they can see that cliff all the way from Sloan's diner, because you can kind of see it in the background exploding. Then in the third row, we cut to Swamp Thing walking somewhere in the swamp, and he's thinking, "What happened with those bikers has made me think about my arm. It's possible, just possible, that what happens to me when my arm regenerates also happens to..." And then the same explosion happens, and Swamp Thing turns around and thinks, "Huh? An explosion?" Then we come back to Hota, Junior, and the duplicates, and we see rocks are raining down from above, and the narration says, "In the space of an instant, an unthinking moment, the work of centuries is undone. Earth and stone avalanche down the mountainside, completely burying the Emerald Grotto and its crystal spring, burying as well one man's hopes and dreams forever. Member of a race seemingly born to humiliation at the white man's hand, Hota Machina has suffered much these past 180 years. Too much when accompanied by this. Within the immortal Indian, the last softness snaps." Then we get a panel of Hota becoming enraged, and he says, "The white man did this! The cursed white man destroyed my world, my life, as he destroyed the life of my father, as he destroyed my race! He must die! He must die!" And then he turns to the duplicate and says, "Seek the white man out, my child! Seek him out and kill him!" And the duplicate Swamp Thing begins to obey him, and as it begins climbing the cliff face, the narration says, "Junior Sloan's cry of horror is unheeded by the enraged Seminole and unheard by the mindless mock Swamp Thing. To say the creature understands the order it's been given would be an overstatement. This swamp creature is incapable of understanding anything, yet it does sense emotion, and in a peculiar way, it responds to Hota Machina's rage. After all, the Indian rescued the monster from death in a quicksand pit." So we see the duplicate Swamp Thing scaling the cliff, and then as he gets to the edge at the top, we see one of the construction workers standing there, and the duplicate Swamp Thing reaches out and grabs the man's ankle, and the man exclaims, "What? Mother of mercy!" And then the duplicate Swamp Thing pulls, and he throws the man off the cliff. Then the Swamp Thing climbs all the way up, and he begins moving towards the bulldozer, and we see Matt, Bolt, and Mr. Halson running towards the Swamp Thing, and Matt exclaims, "Good Lord, Bolt, did you see that? Alec tossed that man like a sack of limp wheat." And Bolt replies, "That's nothing, Cable. Now he's coming this way. Like he don't even know we're here." And as the duplicate Swamp Thing approaches Matt exclaims, "Alec, for heaven's sake, man, stop! This is murder!" But his pleas are cut off as the duplicate Swamp Thing backhands him across the face, and Bolt yells out, "Cable!" And as Matt falls to the ground, Swamp Thing just walks past him, and Bolt rushes over to Matt on the ground, and he says, "Man, he didn't even hesitate. Are you okay?" And Cable replies, "His eyes. Bolt, did you see his eyes?" And Bolt answers, "Forget his eyes, Cable. Something else is happening. He seems to be listening to something. Something we can't hear." Then we see the duplicate Swamp Thing turn and walk past the construction sites and towards the tree line. And as Bolt helps Matt up, he says, "And now he's turning and walking away. It don't figure, Matt. He acted like we were strangers or enemies." And Matt says, "Dear Lord, could Alec have finally gone insane?" Then we cut to our Swamp Thing, the real one, and he is walking somewhere nearby, and he's thinking,
That impulse has become painful, very painful. If what I'm beginning to suspect is true, the only way to stop the pain is to kill what's causing it."
And just as Swamp Thing thinks that, steps out from behind some trees and in front of Swamp Thing. And we get this great panel that's like that meme of Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man and he's saying, "You," because Swamp Thing actually points at his doppelganger and he thinks,
"You, my exact double."
But before Swamp Thing has any time to react, the duplicate Swamp Thing jumps immediately and springs on top of him. And as they both fall back into the water, Swamp Thing thinks,
"Then my suspicions were right. Somehow what was left of my amputated arm grew into another me. But this Swamp Thing has no mind, and apparently wants to kill me. Or does it? Good Lord, what if it only wants to rejoin its body with mine? I have to think this through, because unless I'm mistaken, we are each a match for the other."
So as Swamp Thing is thinking all of this, the doppelganger has his hands around Swamp Thing's throat, but Swamp Thing is able to use the momentum of the fall, and he pushes a leg up as they tumble, which forces the doppelganger up and over him, and the duplicate comes splashing down in the water as Swamp Thing gets up and thinks,
"Which means we could get stuck in a stalemate that would go on forever."
Then we cut to Sloane's diner, where we see Sloane and Earl talking outside, and Abby is still standing out there with them, and the narration says, "Angry voices fill the air outside Bert and Sloane's diner, and no one notices the two figures approaching, until the taller figure speaks with a voice cracked by age. And the two people approaching are Hota and Junior, and Hota yells out at the men,
"White devils, you will pay for your persecution! You will pay!"
And everybody standing in front of the diner turns and looks at Hota, and Abby thinks, "It's Bert Sloane's son, and the Indian Matt and Bolt talked to yesterday. But what's he saying?" And as Hota walks closer to the men, Earl very rudely says,
"What's this about you making folks pay, Redskin?"
And Hota fires back,
"Mock me, White Devil! It makes no difference now! The monster will destroy you! All of you!"
Then Bertrand Sloane looks over at his son, and he says, "Junior, what are you doing with this crazy Indian?"
I warned you about seeing him, boy! I warned you!"
But Junior fires back,
"But Dad, I'm trying to tell you, he's got this monster."
But he's cut off as Bertrand slaps his son in the face, and Abby yells out,
"Mr. Sloane, no!"
But Mr. Sloane is too angry, and he actually turns towards Hota, who's being harassed by Earl the biker, and as he moves towards them, the narration says, "Frustrated, enraged, Burton Sloane looks elsewhere to vent his fury. Fury which is directed more at himself than at any tangible object." So we see Earl grab Hota by the wrist, and he says,
"What's this about a monster, Indian? What's this about you making folks pay?"
And then the narration says, "Burton Sloane is one of those most pathetic of men, the father who cannot admit the independence of his son. Blindlessly, thoughtlessly, he strikes out at the nearest scapegoat." And we see Burton Sloane strike Hota in the face, and he yells out,
"You Indian freak! You're the one who stole my boy! Made him disrespect me! I'll kill you!"
And Burton's punch throws Hota off balance, and Hota falls to the ground, smacking his skull on the curb, and there is an audible crunch sound. Then everybody gathers around Hota's limp body, and Earl bends down and feels for a pulse and says,
"Bert, you killed him! He's dead!"
And Abby exclaims,
"Oh my God!"
And Junior says,
"Dead?"
Then we cut back to the two Swamp Things fighting, and the narration says, "Less than 200 yards away, another drama is coming to a similar crisis. A matter of life and death." We see the duplicate is hitting Swamp Thing with two fists, and as Swamp Thing flies back, he's thinking,
"Funny, up until a moment ago, this thing was fighting as though it wanted to get somewhere. Now it seems lost."
And as Swamp Thing gets back up, he grabs the nearest branch and he hits the doppelganger with it, and he continues thinking,
"But I can't let that concern me. If I don't defeat this creature soon, I won't be able to hold myself erect. We've been at it straight for almost half an hour as it is. This next blow has got to be the last.
And as Swamp Thing strikes the doppelganger again with a tree branch, the duplicate stumbles into the street and falls, and as he tries to get up, the narration says, staggered by the impact, the duplicate Swamp Thing falls to the ground. And then something odd happens. The pseudo-thing lifts its head and sees the dead Indian lying several yards distant. Slowly, its battle forgotten, the swamp creature rises. Forgotten is the instinct which has driven this creature across a continent. Forgotten is the anger which it leached from an old Indian's rage. All of it has been replaced by something which might have been termed love, for lack of a better name. And under this narration, the duplicate Swamp Thing walks over to Hota's limp body, and he kneels down next to him, very sad. Then we see Matt Cable and Bolt and Mr. Houston ride up in the Jeep, and Matt Cable exclaims, there he is, as he sees the duplicate Swamp Thing kneeling down by Hota. And the real Swamp Thing sees Matt and Bolt enter the town, and he thinks,
Matt Cable? Bolt? What's going on here?
Then we see Mr. Houston say to Bolt, good thing I had you boys drive me down here. We've got to destroy that creature. And Bolt looks at him and replies, Houston, don't be crazy. And then Houston grabs something out of a bag, and as he fiddles with it, he says, I'm an engineer, Bolt. I know explosives better than anyone. Now get out of my way and duck. And with that, he lights a stick of dynamite and throws it towards the duplicate Swamp Thing and Hota. And the fuse must have been pretty short on that dynamite because it immediately explodes, and all that's left is a hole in the ground where Hota's body and the duplicate Swamp Thing were. And as the smoke clears, Abby says, Matt, he's dead. Alec Holland is dead. Then we cut to the real Swamp Thing, who was still behind the tree line when all this was happening, so no one saw him, so they actually think the real Swamp Thing is dead. And like always, the real Swamp Thing just turns and he walks away from the scene sad, and the narration says, someday, Alec Holland will learn the full details of what occurred here this morning. But for the moment, he feels only a weary sadness as he leaves the shocked silence in the village behind. For the rest of his life, however long it may be, Alec Holland will wonder why. And then Swamp Thing disappears into the swamp, and that is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.